This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you been thinking about therapy? Have you been trying to get in to see a therapist? Have you found that a lot of therapists that you've been recommended to have either closed books or they've got a really long waiting list? Sometimes months. If you're lucky, it's a couple of weeks. Now, what if there was an alternative that gave you quicker access and at your convenience? So when starting to think about looking for a therapist, try BetterHelp. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient and flexible to your schedule needs. So just fill out the brief questionnaire and get matched with a registered therapist. You can also switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So get moving with therapy and visit BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/Gunter today will give you 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gunter, GUNTER.
Listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host, and today it is with great pleasure that I have with us Karen Sander. And let me just introduce her. This is a very astonishing and effervescent woman who has got a seriously interesting background. She's an author. She authored a book called Aging Fearlessly for Women, and she's a seasoned storyteller and broadcaster who has leveraged her background into children's television, and she has a passion for writing to carve out a unique niche in radio and podcasting. So that's just the beginning sort of thing, okay? Now, following the success of her book in 2015, she ventured into broadcasting. So initially through community TV with Joy's World, and then later on her own show, Aging Fearlessly. So cut a long story short, Karen in the last few years has pivoted into her own passion projects. She's left the corporate job and she set up the Story Room Oz. And this podcast is really going to be about exploring all those multifacets that Karen brings to the table. So welcome, Karen. I'm really excited to have you on the program.
Well, Gunter, thank you. And I'm really excited to be here, usually on the other side of the podcast. So it's nice to be on the guest side for a change.
Yeah, great. Thanks. So let's just have a nice, relaxed, coffee shop conversation. And to begin with, what I'm really interested in is to get your sort of background. So, even if we go back a little bit into childhood and adolescence and young adult, because a lot of these things shape us, don't they?
Well, they do, Gunter. And look, it's interesting you ask. I grew up in a very new area in Sydney back then, near La Perouse. It was called Little Bay. And now it's a very expensive place to live. But back then, I think my parents, it was Crown land. So we got a place there for like £13,000 back in the late 50s, early 60s. And I went to La Perouse Public School and I went to Matraville High, which my father said was the finishing school for young ladies, because once you'd been there, you were finished. It was opposite Long Bay Jail. So, it was look, honestly, one of the most amazing places in Sydney, and I would say the world, to grow up. I had horses, I swam, my mother pushed us to swim hard. in the pool. Hence these days I have a love of ocean swimming, and
Wow.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. I was a skinny kid. I was very nervy and anxious. And though I always had the gift of the gab, which when I look back in my life, there's a few of us in the family, and I think it comes from my grandfather. And I was born on his 50th birthday, and he died when I was 10, but he worked for General Motors at Frigidaire, and he traveled all around the world. So like he died in 66. So you can imagine then flying around the world as an executive was a very new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I sort of think that the gift of the gab that a few of us have has come down the line from him. But yeah, I'm a baby boomer, and I looked up the other day and I fit into the category of the Joneses because we're almost, the same, got to keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah, yeah.
So I only just fit that. So this year I'm 68, and look, I'm adventurous. Yeah, as I said, I'm not afraid of hard work.
Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned I've retired. I'm now my own boss, and as my own boss, I can be a real bitch, and nobody complains except me because, they can't report me to HR because no one listens. But I'm always up for a challenge, and I consider myself as a problem solver, and a connector. I'm really good at connecting people. So yeah, an author and a podcaster.
I'm just trying to picture you as a little kid next to Long Bay Jail.
Oh yeah, yeah. In actual fact, here's a fact: the school used the tennis courts within the jail for school sport.
That just would not happen these days.
No.
You and I are contemporaries, so I'm a baby boomer as well. So we've seen some interesting changes. We might come back to that later.
Yes.
Because having an interesting high school experience like that, where did you go from school? How was that?
Well, I didn't do really well in my HSC. Look, I said I suffered anxiety. It held me back in a lot of ways. And I was also very, very young for my year. I was like most of my friends now are turning 69 and 70 from school, and I'm about to turn 68. So I was way behind. I started school when I was 4, and that's another story about my mother changing my birth date. Because she didn't need a birth certificate, so she pushed me in early. And I guess I was very immature, and I think if I'd have been held back, I would have been more successful. But I did get into teaching, and I taught for 7 years with the Department of Education. I liked teaching, but I didn't love it enough at the time in my life, and so I left. And you mentioned the film industry, and that was the direction, working with young kids who were actors, but not in acting, in education. So they traveled, I traveled. Yeah.
So it's an interesting way for a teacher to go. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I had many, many trips to Europe and around the world working with kids, and I didn't pay for them. I just went along as one of the crew. And I went to some great places like Poland and China in the early 90s. And it was a really interesting way to see the world and work on sets, get to know about film and television, and try and help the kids to get an education at the same time.
Excellent. So in which part of your story then comes your interest in story? Because we're going to develop that theme a lot more, obviously.
Well, you mentioned the early part, the story room. Oz was the first name, and now we call it just the story room.
Right.
Look, I sort of, 2014, I did a course called Key Person of Influence, and that's when I wrote my book. And it was after that the doors sort of opened into many other avenues. And I was working still in the corporate world, but I was invited to tell a story at a live storytelling event, and I went, oh, okay. And I went a few times, watched what people were doing, and then I got on stage one day and told my story. And my story then was about, surviving anxiety, and, I will, watch me was my call to action at the end where they could all call it out. But I think that I kept going and going and going to these events, and I just fell in love with it. And there was nothing on the Northern Beaches where we live, anything like this. And I said to a friend, we could do this. She was sitting next to me in the audience. And she said, no, Karen, you can do it. I'll help, but you have to do it. And I went, okay, I'll do it. And it's been an evolving journey for the last 6 years now.
So that was a gradual pivot point, or would you say a light bulb moment?
It was a light bulb moment.
Right.
Yep. It was, could I tell a story then? Yes. Was I really good at telling a story? I don't know. Yeah, but there's so much to learn about storytelling, and there's rules about storytelling. I'm learning every day. I take courses, and it's a great journey to go on.
So whilst you're on the topic of rules about storytelling, just drop us a few.
Well, if someone sets you a theme, first of all, the story has to be on theme. So if they say never stop believing, you've got to tell a story about never stop believing. If they tell you the story has to be done in 10 minutes, you try as best you can to stick to 10 minutes because it's considered disrespectful to the other storytellers. And it's really open with a great opening, tell the story in the middle, and give the audience a takeaway to do with the theme. And it's about educating people, entertaining them. There's so much that comes into storytelling. Look, I've still got my P plates on. I'm learning.
As I always point out, there's no such thing as perfection. So I tend to go along with you. I always get a bit antsy when people introduce themselves as experts.
Yeah, so do I, because even the word master, there are master storytellers in the world, but they tell stories and they get, they're adjudicated. People go in and tell them, you are a master storyteller. There's people doing TED Talks now, but we learn, and when we listen to stories, we tend to remember them more. And I had a lecturer at Teachers College in Armidale, and his name was, I think it was David Rummery. And honestly, I never wrote a thing in his lectures. He was a literature lecturer, and I just walked away and remembered it because he was so entertaining with story.
Yeah. I had an ancient history teacher like that in high school. Apart from the fact that he was an exemplary disciplinarian, he had the most fascinating classes. Most of us never acted out in any of them, whereas we could be real little buggers in other classrooms.
Never, Gunter, but butter wouldn't melt in your mouth.
Now, possibly now, I was actually a well-behaved kid. In that context, I was a bit like you. I didn't do well in the HSC. I was a bit lost at school, partly because migrated from Europe, So I share some of the sort of touch points that you're bringing up in this. The thing that pulled me out of the swamp was growing up on the Northern Beaches, mainly the surf. So our passion for the ocean, really, in many respects, I see as keeping at least me on the straight and narrow. So if I go, okay, so you've got this really interesting background. In the midst of it all, how would you describe your personal philosophy?
Look, my philosophy is to be proud of what you do, to always add value to the lives of others and to the people around you, your family, your friends, to the work you're doing.
Yeah.
To embrace learning, lifelong learning. Look, I can just tell you that from the journey I've been on, especially the podcasting and the storytelling journey, I am constantly learning. I'm constantly consulting to find out how to do things. And honestly, I feel I'm in some way keeping up with the younger generation. And
Yep.
and hence the gap isn't so big when they're talking to me about new things about Twitter, not that I'm using Twitter, but different, not Twitter, what's in TikTok, but
Yep.
I've got a good idea what's going on around me. Um, I did write the book Aging Fearlessly, and one of my philosophies is to age fearlessly, which it means for me to embrace life, to get on with it, to do the best you can. And always like getting back to lifelong learning, it's to stay curious. Curiosity in life keeps you young and it keeps you going. If you stop asking questions and stop being curious, you may as well just sit on the couch and watch mindless TV.
Yes,
And
I agree.
kindness and authenticity. And I think one of the things I try to bring to my live event is authenticity. If I want to go on stage and cry because the stories just made me cry, I'll go on stage and cry because that's just me.
I think that is just such a valuable thing to bring. Not just your work, but I bring that into my work. I really do believe that's the only way to really establish connection.
Mm.
So that again, there's so many bits that resonate with me, especially the aging fearlessly. It's not just for women, Karen.
Yeah.
It is
Well,
for us as
no,
men to embrace as well.
but I couldn't write about men because I can't speak from a man's point of view in Aging
Yeah, no, I
Fearlessly.
get that. Because there are
And
some significant differences there.
yes, and you know very well about that. I want to go back to the authenticity. I was running an event last year in Cronulla, and there was
Yeah.
a night that I got up on stage, and I was so blown away by a story, and I was so teary. And this woman yelled out from the audience, "That's why we love you, Karen!" And I was, because I'm blubbering on stage like a bloody, Anyway, it's just me. My father was like that too.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
something comes from the heart,
yeah.
you can't hold it back.
No, no. My daughter's 40th birthday party is a good example for me. uh, yes. So that's your personal sort of philosophy is something that's really, encompassing and very, detailed in many respects. Uh, I wonder if that would actually help people to develop their own personal story more in terms of embracing their equivalent of this. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, we've been trying to help people with workshops called Crafting Your Story,
Yeah.
and we've been taking them in and getting them to sort of think about their story and giving them a bit of a meditation and bringing bringing a story to life that's personal. And I think stories that are personal, it's different to telling a folk story, and they're all important. Myths
Mm,
and legends, they're all important. But when it comes down to your own story, I don't think you can escape being authentic, or it
mm,
will never work.
yeah.
And when you start asking people about their stories and asking them questions when they're trying to tell a story, um, they tend to think of more things that have happened while when they're building a story. And I think, having other people involved in you building a story is really important
Mm,
because you have to keep telling a story that you're working on to actually make it come to life.
mm,
And if it's not authentic, you can't just go on stage and tell a story and not use notes, etc., if it's not authentic.
yeah.
And one of my storytelling coaches, and she also does the story room for us sometimes and hosts sometimes, she talks about truth. And you can truth is your story, but you can cloak cloak truth and make truth more interesting. But it's still your authentic story.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a really important thing to know, that, you know, it's like gilding the story, but it makes it more interesting. It's still the truth.
Yes. With a bit of polish.
A bit of polish.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, one of the things as a therapist that I reflect on as you're talking was that, you know, this is very much about, you know, raising self-awareness about yourself, but also that introspective process of really thinking about, you know, what I'm about in my story and where do I want this story to go. You know, I was working with a writing coach in Hollywood, uh, and his thing was, you know, the 3-act structure, and how do you really bring stuff out in that? And you know, I remember sort of doing some work with him on something, and you know, he said, "Look, it's only 10 minutes, but think 3 acts." I'm going, yeah, I got stuck on 1 act being 10 minutes.
Well, that's the other part that I'm also learning, is you don't have to tell everything. You've got to choose what you tell and what's important within that theme. So, you know, you've just got to choose wisely. If someone gives you 5 minutes, you've really got to choose wisely. If someone gives you half an hour to tell the same story, well, you can put so much more in. But time is what time is the essence, and then you choose what you will tell.
Yeah. So what you're sharing with me, Karen, is that there's the story room, and then there are these workshops that you're running.
Yep.
So, two separate entities, dovetailed entities. What would you say there?
Well, I've not been teaching the warehouses, the workshops. I've been having a storyteller and an NLP and coach help with the stories and the workshops, But it's I think it's important, because a lot of people want to come and tell their stories and they don't know where to begin, which is why we decided to run the stories. Hopefully we'll be able to have some online soon, some workshops online. But without telling, because we have a total privacy about who comes and tells and what they tell their stories about. But in that room, amazing things happen, and people with disabilities, you know, even cerebral palsy, come along because they have stories and they want to tell their stories, but they are afraid to tell their stories and they think nobody wants to listen to their story. But as you coach them through, they realize how important their story is and that they can tell their story. We just have to find a way to help them tell their story. An example, even recently, and this isn't a workshop, but one of the girls, the women I was introduced to at Cronulla, she's profoundly deaf. And I did a podcast with her. Well, she came first of all to the event in Cronulla, and she had no idea how to tell a story. And it was very long. There was a lot in it. But we had it all Auslan interpreted, and we had people turn up who've never been to story before because they're deaf and they can't hear a story. So that was really exciting. And then we brought her over to Manly. We got it across the bridge. She came over to Brookvale and she told a story there. And, you know, it brings so much to the audience when someone, it's another, you know, it's a person who's not, you don't normally hear it storytelling. And it's normally all sign language, but she speaks beautifully. And I think, you know, I was able to coach her along with one of the other women to bring her story down to a 10-minute story that can be told on a stage. And I think it's a pleasure to work to people to help them, you know, build a story.
And then be able to articulate and share, you know, it's that, you know, you human beings have had an age-old tradition of sharing story. And one of the things that I'm very conscious of is that in the age of technology, often that storytelling has become one way. Like we'll sit down and we'll watch a play, or we'll, go to the cinema, or we'll sit and binge watch Netflix.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'll work with teenagers, and I often ask them things like, "So, tell me about your mum and dad's background, your grandparents," and I find it fascinating how narrow their understanding and knowledge is of even their parents' background. Like I asked a teenager recently, "So what's your dad do?" And he looks at me and he goes, I think he sort of like works I think he works in advertising." And I go, "You think?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm not really sure." And I went, "So what about your mum?" And he goes, "Yeah, no, mum's the teacher." And I went, "Oh, that's really interesting. What in?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know."
Oh, it's incredible, isn't it?
And then, as I'm sort of doing that, he looks at me and he goes, "I think I should know this, shouldn't I?" And I went, "Yeah, I think there's room for a discussion between your dad and you and your mum and you." But if I go to grandparents, even that is even more challenging for a lot of them. We've lost that capacity to sit around, and I watch it, in circle of friends often. Sitting around having a meal is often about storytelling, but a
Mm,
lot of people don't sit around a table anymore and eat meals. They watch TV, or they're on devices.
mm.
So you know, obviously, without putting too fine a point, I think I'd be okay to say that you see storytelling as a pathway to personal growth, but also to community growth.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I just want something you said a minute ago, often at the story room these days, we get men who have started men's groups, and your conversation about the boys not understanding what their parents do. A lot of men have formed, mental health groups, whatever,
Yeah,
and where they get together and they walk, talk, they shoot the breeze together, because men aren't usually very good at doing this.
no,
And hence, I have a lot of them come and want to tell their story on stage now about the groups they're running. And it's amazing. It's fantastic, because the stories behind the person that may have founded this group, they've gone through these personal struggles. And I think them sharing their story is helping other people. And that's what the event is doing. That's people come in to listen to stories, to learn, to embrace others, to feel connected, to, for education. There's so many reasons to come and listen to stories. I think I might have gone off the question a bit then, but you.
not quite. I mean, you know, if the story room is about bringing people together to listen, you know, each of the stories was about 10 minutes, let's
Mm,
say. Right? And there's a series of them. I know when you invited me to do mine, bits of it, I have a tendency to blur out after I've done something. Like someone the other day asked me, "Oh, what's your TEDx talk?" And I went, "Oh, that's nice." And I'm going, "What did I do there?" And I had to go back to YouTube, pull it up, and go, "Oh yeah, that's what I did."
that's
Um,
incredible. Yeah.
and part of the reason is because I get so into it, and I use a lot of energy, that by the time I get off the stage, my brain's sort of going, "Okay, park that one. You've done your bit."
Yeah.
Um, so I remember it being a really interesting night and listening. I can still remember all the other stories that were being told, but my
Mm.
own, I sort of go, what did I do? But it's about that connection. It really is about, for me, about that connection. I don't think we, have enough of that.
Yeah. And it's, there's many ways you can connect at a story room event, because
Mm,
sometimes it's through poetry, sometimes every now and again through song, sometimes through comedic forms. And in fact, tonight we've got a comedian on stage. There's just amazing ways to bring a story to being. And And I love it, Gunter, when you sit in a room and the person on stage is telling a story and there's 100-odd people in the room and you could hear a pin drop. And you look around the room and you look at the faces of the people in the audience just staring at the person on stage. And then, sometimes there's a smile, but sometimes it's like they're just totally overwhelmed by the story. You can see them taking it in. You can see their brains clicking over and absorbing the information that's being shared. And oh my God, it's such a privilege to be able to bring that to a stage. And that's something I really, when I started this event, didn't envisage would happen. I had no idea what I thought would happen.
Well, I was about to ask you, with all of this, when you had that light bulb moment where you can, well, I'm going to do this, you didn't have, obviously, from what you're saying, all the pieces that would eventually come to bear on this.
It's just evolved, and initially when I started, we got hit by COVID. The first event, and I started that first event, they were sitting where it was in a pub in a nice room and everybody was in theatre style. And what I learned later about theatre style, it doesn't allow you to connect as well. So we came back the next year and of course COVID said, you've got to sit at a table and you've got to be a metre and a half from the other table and you've got to wear a mask and you can't breathe and you can't talk and you can't laugh. So it was really interesting because I went, tables, but the best way to do it is at a table because you're not always sitting with the people you know. You come in and you sit down, especially if you're on your own. I throw people on a table when they come, if they're on their own, I go, oh, you can sit here, they'll like you. And so that's sort of how it evolved. But we eventually had to change venues, which was, I was disappointed about, but we found an even better venue, a brewery. What a great place to tell stories, in a brewery. It's honestly, the beer's good, the wine's good, there's a food truck out the back, and it's a big, enormous room that fits 130 people in. And we do have that many sometimes. But it's evolving. Just the people we have on stage, I look for diversity. I always try to have something different, like the woman who's profoundly deaf, like the transgender person, like the rabbi who's trying to, work with schools to, bring about an understanding that we're all the same. All these important conversations, and these are the things. I don't know, it's just a bit naive. It's just become so amazingly,
diverse.
It's just joyous and diverse. Yeah.
Yeah. No. You brought up some challenges here, and I wanted to ask you, if we go through a few sections, what are some of the challenges that you've run into, and what would you say as being some of the triumphs, in your journey with this? What did you experience there?
Well, getting the right venue, we thought we had it, but the venue that we originally had decided that they wanted to charge us a fortune to be there. And, we don't make a lot of money out of it. So we had to change. So, what? It's, we ticked that. We got on with it. Took me 3 months, but we found the perfect venue. Social media, and websites. Do my head in. I'm not tech-minded. That's probably now my biggest challenge. Finding the right storytellers. I seem to have a knack at it now, but women are very, very easy to get, to find and get on stage. Men sometimes a little bit harder, so I've always got the call out for interesting men to tell a story. I guess they're the biggest challenges. Staying in your own lane. You can watch what other people are doing in the same area, in the same field, but try not to take on what they're doing and stick to my own lane. like now I've introduced a podcast into the whole thing, and that's the way we're hoping now to grow and to take it to a broader community. But there's been plenty of challenges. So what are some of the great things? Every storytelling event is different. It brings so much joy to the community. I have many repeat guests in the audience. People just turn up every month after month after month. And now the podcast, because I really get, like you do, to have really in-depth conversations and to delve right into someone's life. And I have people telling me about breaking out of jail, about, oh my God, some of the stories make your hair curl. But it's fascinating understanding the stories. And for me, it's helped me to become a better person and to my personal growth, myself, my empathy. I'm really proud of what I've learned because it's changed me as a person. I think I'm a better person than the person that started this 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, Karen, because I mean, I suspect your exposure to lots of different types of people is quite unusual to the everyday person. I mean, most of us, you know, we go to work, we have our work colleagues, then we come home, we spend time with family, then we have a social group, and it's become they become echo chambers, in a way.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I experienced is the couple of times I've been there is that it is so different and it is so interesting. Now, as a therapist, I get lots and lots and lots and lots of different people with different stories coming in. But as I said, for the average person, it's not like that. I think the broadest exposure is when someone goes to uni, and then even there they create a bubble. And these days, half of the students that I work with are doing it online, and I go, "Don't do it online. Go to uni."
Yeah, I think the whole online thing, there's a whole disconnection. It's not community. It's not, learning about people. It's not learning to adjust or to accept that we're all different. You can't get that online.
No, I agree. I mean, people often ask me about, can we do therapy online? And I go, and I can do I can do coaching and possibly counseling, but I can't do therapy online. There's a
Yeah.
difference. And I don't think we have enough conversation about those sorts of differences. Everybody defaults to online. It's like, kids being taught online during COVID. And then people started coming out going, well, these kids have missed out on a whole bunch of stuff. No kidding. We could have, we knew that beforehand.
Yeah.
So, in this whole area, obviously you're talking about your own personal growth in this. So is story always about that, or can it be just frivolous?
Well, story is also just about entertaining. And I guess when you've got a comedian telling a story on stage, it's about entertainment, isn't it? Or, it can be frivolous, and it can be, some stories are obviously fantasy. But my events are really about true stories. But we're going to have one in a few weeks, in a few months, called "What Was I Thinking?" Can't wait to hear, what people are saying about "What Was I Thinking?" It'll be hilarious, I'm sure. So often the theme that we give each month brings about a different type of story and a different learning. And yeah, it's really, it's just so funny how different people interpret the theme that you give them. And I did one not so long ago, and it was called Dare to Dream. And one of the story, all 5 told about daring to dream, and they were different stories, but one of them told Dare to Fail, Dare to Dream of Failing. And he's a comedian, but the story was very relevant. that we can dream, but we're not always going to succeed with what we do.
Yeah.
So be prepared to fail,
Yeah.
because that failure will help you to grow, to then go on to dream bigger, to perhaps at some stage achieving that dream. But we can't assume that we're always going to succeed.
Yeah.
Because there are times that we will fail. I've had some huge failures.
Well,
Social media being one of them.
I think that's a significant message to put out there. Again, my work with teenagers is that they either perceive themselves as a failure because they haven't achieved what an adult wants them to achieve, or they go into something with the expectation that they will succeed, and then when there's a stumbling block, go to pieces. And so often I'm there going, okay, look, feeling upset about this is okay, but why does that need to stop you from giving it another shot? I mean, if you fall over, if you stay on the ground, you're not going to go anywhere. As a 2-year-old, you would have gotten up again, right? How about you be that little 2-year-old and get up again?
Yeah, and look, I think parents are responsible for the helicopter, about helicoptering around and protecting their children instead of letting them fall over and get up again and have a go. That's about resilience.
Yeah.
We're not encouraging the younger population, our children, etc., our grandchildren, to actually be resilient.
Yeah. Because, like, as we're talking, this is completely off the top of my head. I'm sort of going, a process for teenagers to engage with something like the story room would be actually really good for them.
Yeah, and someone said to me the other day, get more young people along. Well, tonight we have a couple of young people along, and I try to get a lot of young people along. They're just not as eager as the over 40s to come and share a story. I think they're probably busy with another sort of social life to the ones that we're providing.
I've got another spin on that. I think you're probably right to a degree, but I think the other part of it is that a lot of them would be thinking, "What have I got to say?" And the other part of it is, if I can't say it perfectly, I'm not going to do it. This social anxiety that I see persistently amongst teenagers and young adults is, for some of them, almost crippling. They have this massive potential, but they can't actualize it, or they don't allow themselves to actualize it. So, if I sort of go, okay, Karen, where to from here with the story room? I mean, this is such a great medium. And
well, we can work together to get some young people sharing stories in a way to bring them into the world of storytelling. I think they can all learn to share a story and learn that, it's okay to fail, or it's okay to not give your best story. Then it just gives you something to work on. Yeah, it's and look, many people that come on the story room, I've had to coach through sharing a story. I had a young woman a few years ago who had been homeless, sleeping on the streets for many, many years. And, her story was about triumphing. Can you say that word for me? The word succeeding and managing to get a life together and to live a decent life again. And they're important stories. Look, I'd love to work more with younger people. And in schools, I think it's important to have people share these stories. And maybe it would stop a lot of bullying that goes on around, bullying in the workplace, bullying at school. If people understood other people, and that's what stories can help to do.
I agree. And again, I'm sort of going, there's so much in this to let it grow and evolve. I remember I trained in group therapy, and one of the aspects that I trained in was psychodrama. And they were seriously powerful groups. And, storytelling is part, can be part of the whole process of psychodrama.
Mm,
Um, and if, but we've, because of the way that we think about mental health, a lot of that sort of creative stuff's gone out the door. Like if I look at inpatient programs these days, there's very little of that. They have group therapy, which is very structured, and they have individual sessions with psychiatrists and psychologists. But when I started working as a psychologist in the 80s, we had art therapy, occupational therapy, music therapy. There's a whole bunch of stuff was going on. None of that is being utilized anymore.
yeah.
And group therapy was often, there would be a structured group, but there would also be a completely unstructured group where people were just asked to share their story. And
Mm.
some of those groups were the most powerful experiences for a lot of people.
Yeah, there's some groups around, campfire groups. There's a few good groups now that are forming where people can
Yeah,
share their stories. I think, one of the things that I've learnt and which became the tagline for the story room was that sharing stories changing lives, because it was the thing that I learnt from observing and hearing testimonies of people who attend the story room, and not only people who attend, but people who are sharing their stories, because
yeah,
it does change lives. And hence that's, we talk about the story room and the workshops, but then now has come the podcast, of which we're now madly working with the podcast to help build a more global opportunity to hear people's stories. So, like you, I love getting someone, you know, on a call and actually recording their stories, because
yeah,
it's like Sharon, who is profoundly deaf, and she lip read the whole
yeah,
podcast and answered, and you just get blown away because
yeah,
how phenomenal her story is. And you can really
yeah,
dive into, well, what happened? You were born deaf. Then what happened? And why did you start your own business? What was it like in the workplace? And how are you helping other people? So it's like a story in a resume of all she's been able to do. And I love that. It gives a real depth to every story.
yeah, yeah. Nice, nice, very nice. So, tell me a bit more about the podcast. The podcast is each person's story, or how does your podcast work, Karen?
So I they're not just the people from the story room. When I find someone who has a great story, I will
Yep,
ask them to share it in a podcast. And, it might
yep,
be like one that's coming up. She's a publisher, but that's not the story. I'm not talking about her career now as a publisher, but I'm talking about her life, the journey she went through to become a publisher. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Because it was it was a huge journey with many ups and downs, many twists and turns, and it was about resilience. So it's a story of resilience. And
mm,
so that's what I try to do with each of the podcasts, is have a theme that we're diving into someone's life, whether it's courage. There's another one, a woman just set off this week, and she's riding across the globe to the UK on her own on a motorcycle, through
wow,
all through many of the stands, up through China.
ah,
And so you go, that's a story worth telling. And why is she
absolutely,
doing this? So
ah,
there, that's a story of courage and resilience, and it's a story of grief,
yeah,
which is why it started.
yes, okay,
So
yes,
that's the background, again, sharing stories
mm,
that they have the opportunity to change lives.
mm. So, we're getting close to the end of it, Karen.
Yes.
So, any sort of thoughts you want to share with the audience? Final thoughts, any advice, any sort of suggestions?
Yeah, well, yes. One of the things that I've learned over the years, Gunter, is to listen. And I think for me, I didn't understand what listening was about. And when you learn to listen, you learn so much. And it's, listening, if I'm listening to you, if I'm listening to someone else, it helps to build trust. It makes us better communicators. Um, it helps us be problem solvers. And I think listening for me has been key to the journey that I'm on now. And Colin always says to my partner, you love it when you're out talking to people and having coffee and finding storytellers, because I get a chance to go along and listen quietly while they tell me their story and I get to sip coffee. And then I can decide, is this going to be a story? And I get an education. I've learnt about Uyghurs. I've learnt about stolen children in Timor-Leste. Listening helps me to learn and to listen and not be judgmental. And I think another thing, a piece of advice, is to embrace life and don't be afraid of it. We all stuff up. We all have our challenges. Procrastination's another one that I really don't understand because I'm a bit impulsive. I'm not a procrastinator, but to me, when I'm procrastinating, it's hard because I'm ruminating. Do you understand that? Like it's going over and over and you're not moving forward and you're just wasting time. And I think kindness, I said it before, authenticity, celebrate your successes and embrace your challenges along the way and treat them as a learning curve. Learn from your mistakes, learn from your failures. And we all have a story, and each of our stories is really important. Learn to tell your own story.
Yeah, that's great, Karen. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. I'm just wondering, would you be open to doing another one?
Oh, God, yes. I hate to talk.
Yes, you and me both. But I think the difference between you and the similarity between you and I in amongst the talking is that we actually are good listeners. I had to learn it. I was an only child. So most of my exposure was to listening to adults, but I realized that whilst listening to adults, I was in my own head. And then when I started, really literally working towards becoming a counselor and a therapist, was that I needed to quiet my mind down so that I could really hear what the other person was saying. So I often now, especially with when I work with someone who's in a relationship where they're having difficulties, I try to get them to mindfully listen before they actually speak, and it's a real skill. Again, if I come back to the whole social anxiety thing, the kids that I work with and the young men that I work with, they have too much of a conversation in their head about what they think the other person is expecting from them, so that they actually don't hear the other person.
And something that I've learned when I'm podcasting is that if I was podcasting with you and you said something that I wanted to take up later, I just scribble on a bit of paper and I can come back to it, because the minute you interrupt and stop listening, you stop the flow of the conversation and you lose the story.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's the key to listening is, once you start interrupting, it becomes about you.
Yeah.
And not about the person that you're speaking with.
Yeah. And on that note, Karen, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me.
You are welcome.
And I will take you up on the coming on again.
Anytime.
So also, I'm not going to be able to be there tonight, unfortunately, but have a fantastic and a very successful evening.
Yeah, and if people want to know more about what we're doing, it's just karensander.com. And, Gunter, you know how I said I was challenged with tech? Well, I've been building a membership area, hopefully also to give people the option to be able to listen to some of the stories. I loaded one of yours up last week. It'll be in there. Called Never Stop Believing, actually. And so we're trying to give the opportunity through the podcast and through the membership area to have more people involved in storytelling. But yeah.
No, excellent. So again, how can they get in touch?
Well, karensander.com is my website, and there's lots of different, pages there that they can look at, from Aging Fearlessly through to the story room and a membership area.
All right. Again, thanks, Karen.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. To all of you out there listening, let me suggest that this is a very important message to take out, and that is that you all have a story to tell, one that can inspire you and or others and help initiate some change. Would you agree, Karen?
Yes, for sure. Initiating change, inspiring people, very, very important. And I love the work you do in this area, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Karen, and you too. Until next time.
This is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.